welcome. I'm Barnard Crespi, and today we'll be talking about automated staffless phone payments and how leveraging IVR payments to improve efficiency, security, and cost savings in the healthcare space. With me, I have Jonathan Reick, who is the healthcare solution consultant at Global Payments. Jonathan, thank you for joining us today, and I'm looking forward to hearing your insights.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
So today, one of the first things I want to talk about is some of the challenges with what we call manual phone payments. And we understand that handling phone payments can be a huge drain on staff resources, especially during busy periods for hospitals. This not only is reducing their overall productivity, but also takes them away from critical tasks that could benefit their organization. Jonathan, what are you observing when talking to hospitals regarding, some of this challenge around manual,
Yeah,
phone payments?
absolutely. No. This is something we hear all the time. Most or virtually every single organization is doing this right now, where they're taking payments over the phone. They have a staff on the phone waiting, basically, for someone to call in, and then they'll be able to take payments. There's multiple different ways in which they are currently taking payments over the phone like that, but they are always using a live person that is very resource intensive. And not only that, but as we've seen in the past, it's not always future proofed, right? When it comes like to certain scenarios in the world that kick off and that staff is not necessarily there, it may pose problems. So yeah, it's something we're seeing all the time, but there's a lot of things that we can do to address that.
Well, to your point, I mean, we talk about future proofing. COVID was not that far behind us, and that was one of those cases where not having the staff to be there all the time to collect payments impacted on their collection rates. Now, the other thing that we've noticed is, and we need to talk about, is that when staff members are exposed to sensitive credit card information, uh, the risk is increased. So automating the process, reduces the risk, specifically when the existing process means that a staff member is picking up the phone, talking to a patient, uh, entering credit card information that they hear over the phone. What are you hearing in terms of hospitals using these methods that expose a credit card? And of course, being that you're in the payment processing space as well, you probably been exposed quite a bit about this.
Yeah, absolutely. I think IVR with having that phone payment functionality where people are just going on and you have an actual person there, you're really exposing yourself from an organizational perspective to both legal, financial risk. There's a lot of things that are going on with that. Some things we don't consider while having a staff take phone payments. You might be thinking, okay, well, they're just directly entering it on either their terminals that they're using to take phone payments or on their virtual terminal, which is an application on the web that you can log in and you can pay, you can complete payments through there, much like on Amazon, but it's really self-serve from the organization perspective. When you're using one of those two, most of the time when people are actually listening to the number that are being read, some of the people are going to be writing it down on paper. I am extremely tactile. People love writing on paper. And then this way, if they enter it incorrectly on the keyboard, wherever that may be, they're going to go reference their paper rather than ask the patient again, can you go ahead and repeat that for me? I missed that. So what is that? That is storing, unfortunately, the card data. And that's where you're exposing yourself to potentially a lot of
It's
risk.
it's interesting. I mean, you talk about the sticky note. I carry
There
my
you go, you
sticky
too.
notes,
Yeah.
my
I mean,
sticky
it's
notes as
natural.
well, and it's interesting because I was talking to some of our folks who deal with the PCI compliance and helping the merchants, identify, what they're doing from a scope perspective, and they're telling us the exact same thing that you're saying. Just a staff member naturally will write that credit card in a sticky note, you know, the credit card, the expiry date, and the CVV, the code, and taking that sticky note and putting it on their monitor for later on when they have more time to enter that credit card into the virtual terminal that you've described. And that, when we're talking about payment automation, I mean, part of the goal is to remove that risk.
Yeah.
Now, one of the things that is interesting, everybody's always asking, cost, cost, cost. I mean,
Yeah.
it's a good interest, and we have to have this balance between
Of course.
security, compliance, cost, and future proofing. But What's interesting is that what the cost is of a manual process. It's very hard to predict, you know, because the call durations and follow-ups many times are unpredictable. I mean, we've heard, in certain markets where picking up a phone and talking to a patient, for instance, the interaction to enter requested credit card information could last maybe 2 minutes, but the conversation ends up being a 5, 6 minute, 10-minute conversation, depending on who you have on the other line. And it's very difficult to go and say to that other person, hey, your time is up. You no longer can actually give me, we're done collecting your card. Sorry, I got to go. But that's not something. So, cost, it's not that when we are automating the process, costs become a lot more predictable. And most organizations are not really today quantifying the cost of actually handling the credit card information through with a staff member. Is this something that you are observing as well when you're talking to some of the merchants?
Absolutely. I mean, absolutely. And it's interesting. Like you said 10 minutes, and I'm sure most calls are probably right around that time. But imagine 10 minutes, that's 1/6 of the salary, the hourly wage of that employee, yet alone all the additional costs involved with that.
Yes.
So it's very costly. So when we talk about cost, all these organizations, when we speak about IVR, these type of technologies that could automate this process for them, they're cost neutral, or if anything, they're saving money at the end of the day. So it's
Yeah.
really interesting from a
It,
cost
it
perspective to talk about that.
yeah, it's interesting because I mean, always looking at cost is it becomes from an unpredictable model of calculating what the cost of processing a card over the phone is today with using a live, staff member, to the being able to predict it in terms of how much if we were to automate it. That's one of the key benefits is the predictability element to it. Now what I want to do a little bit here, if it's okay, I want to jump into some real life success stories because I think that uh, understanding what other hospitals are doing and we hear a lot of stories. You may hear some, you have more than I do as well. But one of the things was that recently we were talking to a healthcare provider in Canada, and what they shared with us is so within a few months of implemented the automated payment, the phone payment, their phone payment calls to their billing team was reduced by 96%. And I mean, this is a
That's
significant
very.
improvement in their team's efficiency. Is this what you hear as well when you're talking to some of the merchants that you work with?
Oh, absolutely. As soon as you add any type of automation like this, you're absolutely going to reduce significantly. But 96, 95% reduction is tremendous. Can you simply imagine having all those calls being routed directly? Imagine all those staff that you have that are already a very limited resource. You can now transfer to other tasks that need to be done to improve and enhance that patient experience further, right? I mean, yes, then you'll have some people who hear sometimes as well, it's 95%, right? It's not 100%. You're never going to get to that 100%. That's, of course, you're going to have someone that always wants a live agent. We understand that. That's the reality of it, right? But if you're able to reduce that by 95, I think that is a
I,
huge.
I, I would say even if they were able to reduce 50%
Yeah,
reduction of calls to their staff, I mean, the interesting thing is what we hear is that if you look at their job description, I mean, it's a fairly long job description, and taking payments by phone is just one probably of 20 different job,
yeah,
elements on their job description, which is taking, when you have some hospitals in big markets, when you have hundreds of inflow calls per month, because this is not they're just receiving one call or 2 months. I mean, so we've seen some of our collective customers are in the hundreds, if not thousands, of calls every month in order to make a payment, depending on the demographics, people who are more comfortable making phone payments. This could significantly reduce the impact. As you said, they're overstretched.
yeah.
They're already over, meaning there's the markets are growing, but not necessarily the billing teams are not necessarily
Yeah.
growing proportionately.
Yeah. The flip
Now,
side of that is capturing payments outside of working hours, right? When you have staff directly there, you're
yes,
limited. You're limited to, we've seen hospitals with 8 to 4, 9 to 5, right? Those times. but we're seeing maybe like, what is it, 27% of payments are outside of those working hours. So just being accessible throughout all those hours can drastically increase collection rates as well as reducing those financial and legal risks that are exposing you to sensitive card information. But you're also reducing a lot of that outbound collections, going at 30, 60 to 90-day collections, simply by being accessible to your clientele.
Very, you talk about accessibility, you talk about hours of operation, and that's going to lead me into another, success story that I think it's important. And this, you and I have actually discussed this before. We had a customer who was leveraging automated payment reminders, and what they were doing is rather than having agents or their staff make phone calls out or even send statements through, in paper at scale, they decided, to use a technology to actually start pushing reminders through voice, automated voice, and automated text messaging. On the flip side of that is what happens is that they realize is that there's an increased amount of phone calls back to them, right? Because not everybody, yes, one of the many options that they have is online payments, or they can, go to the bank and make a online banking payment. But many of them were actually making phone calls. And before they implemented the IVR payments, they could arrive because they realized, to your point about after hours, that the best time to actually call their patients and remind them was after hours. So when your office is not available after hours to collect a payment, you're missing out on the big opportunity when your patients or your customers actually have the time to actually make the payment. But what it was interesting because we had this customer call us and they said, we made this massive outbound reminders on a Friday. We arrived to the office and we have 250 calls in our voicemail, right? Waiting. Now, I mean, the interesting thing is, forget about the effectiveness of automated payment and reminders, but if they would have actually had, in this case, voice, automated payments by phone, they could have actually saved immense amount of resources in trying to actually get back to their customer, their patients in this. So
Yeah, instead of
how
coming back on Monday to 200 voicemails, right? Let alone how many calls they probably received. Not everybody leaves a voicemail for one, but instead of receiving 250 voicemails, they could have ended up with on Monday on their bank account having collected the entirety of the amounts, right? Simply by implementing that simple IVR technology to their disposal.
Yeah, which is, goes back, the interesting aspect of it is that when you're marrying these little pieces of technology together, the improvements in efficiency and productivity are massive. And you and I have talked many times, patients and customers are already trained to expect to be able to transact with their vendors or their providers whenever it's convenient to them.
Yeah.
So if one of the channels that as the as a consumer or as a patient, I expect that you'll be able to take payments by phone, uh, should be available, at the same time that I am ready and prepared to actually making those payments.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit. I want to talk a little bit about, some of the benefits because I think it's important. We talked about user experience. We talked about some use cases that are success stories, some metrics. Let's talk about, for instance, the flexibility and automation, right? So the interesting thing about IVR payments is that it does not have to be an all or nothing approach, meaning uh, a lot of customers, they realize how they can automate the whole process, how they can integrate into their business systems and through their information management systems. But the interesting thing is that in what we see with IVR payments is that does not need to be an all or nothing situation. Small but very basic automation, meaning in removing the live staff or replacing them with an automated phone payments for 24/7 can make a significant improvement to the efficiency. Any thoughts on that, Jonathan?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we understand the reality of hospital organizations. Funds is always something. Resources from a capital, from a human capital, but also financial capital side is always limited. And so, what we're seeing a lot of organizations doing is a phased approach, right? Slowly but surely, getting better and better throughout time. The technologies are now available to do that, right? Where you can have such as we're talking a lot here about IVR, that being the focal point of this discussion here. IVR you can implement in standalone, meaning it's not talking with any other systems. You can then start with that, then move on to get payment reminders, right? Digital payment reminders to implement, to foster more calls to get more payments. Then after that, you can head into an integrated version of the payment
Yes.
reminders to automate that process for you, so you don't have to get any staff
And
involved.
the phone payments as, and you can automate the phone payments as
And then you
well.
finish with the
Yeah.
phone payments being automated as well, right? This is all happening in a phased approach. You can people hospitals always do these strategic plans, doing this type of stuff, finding out this technology exists and implementing that in a phased approach through the strategic plan across years is definitely the best way. And a lot of organizations are doing that. You see incremental benefits across every single stage, and this way it's justifiable in your ROI case while building that business case for your executive leaders. You just see the incremental change across time, and that's really fostering that idea of increasing collections, increasing that patient enhancements, right? All that type of stuff, as well as, of course, as we mentioned in the beginning, reducing that risk. This is something we see time and time again.
Yeah, which leads me into the next thing. From a benefit perspective, is about enhanced security, and
Yeah,
we know that for hospitals, security is paramount. And one of the interesting, when we actually think about what goes on in all the cases of whenever there's been a security incident, is the fact that the more we are able to remove the human factor from handling credit card information is critical, right?
yeah,
So, meaning, and this is exactly what IVR Payments does,
absolutely.
is
Yeah.
removes the staff from hearing, writing, typing card information, putting it on a sticky note, having access to information that by removing it, it would improve their security, and it provides them with, it contributes to PCI compliance. And of course, like you always, I know you discussed this earlier, it helps with the reduction of risk. And I know, what when you're talking to merchants, how high up in the priority list is removal of risk?
It's pretty high. I mean, as soon as you add a human in any process, humans are susceptible to bribery, corruption, right? Not necessarily the person that you hired, but also if they keep it on sticky notes, like we said earlier, well, that sticky note, where is that going, right? Or do you have proper disposal? Is someone interrupting that and taking that and now using that information? So it's really looking at every single step of the process. Another thing that we often hear is, are the calls being recorded? I mean, sure, yeah, maybe they're not taking it
That's a
and writing it down.
that's
Maybe the
that's
call is
that's
being recorded. So now IT or whoever has access to the backend has every single credit card information that you've ever taken on the phone. Now imagine a hacker comes in and takes all of that credit card information. Imagine the reputational risk, right? For that coming out in the news is not something any organization wants, let alone being hacked. But then also losing sensitive information from a credit card financial aspect, that's a big risk. And so removing humans, removing these elements, increasing your PCI compliance, but removing a lot of these other not necessarily considered risks is really where a lot of these people, these or new organizations are focused on in reducing that type of risk. Absolutely, it's a
so
main focus.
then let's move, because security is, as we said, is paramount. Removing the human element to security and is also critical. And IVR Payments, obviously, is providing more predictability around the security element of it, much more control. But let's, we earlier talked about cost reduction and predictability, right? And the interesting thing, when we talk about automation, and everybody agrees on this, in principle, is that anytime that we're automating, the cost reduction is tremendous, right? And when we are automating a process, the cost of that automation are predictable, right? So when and goes to the original conversation that we had, that when a patient is calling into the billing team and talking to a human, one of our staff members, right? There's no predictability over how long that call can be. you know. So it could be 5 minutes, it could be 10 minutes, and telling, obviously, as we said before, telling the customer, hey, your time is up. We're done talking. You've made your payment. I don't need to know about your life anymore, and hang up. It's not really an option, right? So, with IVR payment automation, we know how long those calls will take, right? So the cost becomes a lot more predictable, and the cost can be better allocated in, from a staffing perspective, in some more meaningful tasks. Do you have any thoughts on this? Because I know we're talking about removing staff, but that's not really what the goal is here, is to shift staff responsibility from handling something that is high risk and not very predictable from a how much time they'll spend, to something more important
Yeah.
within, that whole list of responsibilities that they have as part of the billing team.
Yeah, it's scope reduction at the same time as you're doing risk reduction. That's exactly what that is, right? It's not necessarily removing staff, because we know staff is definitely a main hurdle. You can reallocate, you can shift our scope, decrease it even to increase employee retention and employee satisfaction, right? If they have less tasks and they can focus more attentively on something else, you'll get a greater ROI from that employee as well, right? Having someone spread out very thin will never lead to successful results. You see that anything you do in your life, I mean, even in sports, you can think about it from your own perspective. If you're not focused on it, you'll never get there, right? So you have to be focused in anything you do in life, and that includes employees. You can't have them spread out in 10, 20 different tasks. That scope, it has to be reduced, and you can do that
You know,
while reducing
it,
costs
it,
and risks.
it's funny because you talk about responsibilities, right? And I don't think anybody in the billing team, when they applied for
So,
the job, or they got hired, one of the job descriptions was spend a lot of time talking to patients or customers in order to get their credit card, right? Or the interesting one, the one that always gets overlooked, and we talked about this earlier, was the cost associated to follow-ups when a patient leaves a voicemail. When you're actually thinking of a hospital who's receiving maybe two, three, four, 500, 1,000 phone calls, for payments a month, and this is say all you need to do is 10% of that, because I, what we've discovered is about 25 to 30% of people actually pay, like, call after hours. Imagine that turns into voicemails.
yep.
And that means, on 1,000 payments a month, that means 300 voicemails that you have to listen, you have to follow up on, right?
Yep.
So the ability now, if we apply just some basic automation, and I'm talking about basic, I'm talking, that's why we're saying, this is not about implementing the kitchen sink. This is about basic automation to avoid the time and expense, is it's available from the beginning,
Yeah,
right?
that's a really
So
good point, as well as the implementation, right? It's not adding the kitchen sink, it's changing the wires. You put the hot on the cold, you're just flipping it. That's all it is from an implementation perspective. It is extremely simple. You utilize your existing phone tree, you add a routing number to that, and you're done.
yeah,
It
and
is
it's
extremely
interesting. I mean,
simple.
most people who have ever maybe done a renovation in their house, they start with, I want the kitchen, or I want a washroom, and it's hard to just focus on, that's the only thing I want to do is a washroom. That was my plan, and all of a sudden that spreads like wildfire. I mean, when you start asking anyone who started a project in their house, did they stick to that particular one project, or it started to, there's this domino effect that it will go everywhere. And that's the same thing with choosing this type of technologies, that it can be so transformative, that is, it's hard to say, no, I'm just going to stick to some of the basics. But the fact is that, like, you, to your point, some of the basics have some significant incremental outcomes. And that's really the message that we want to pass on, is that they can, it's not an all or nothing situation. It can start with phases, to your point before, as to how you can implement phases, and how you can gain, improvements to the organization in phases as well. Before, we, because our time is coming up here, so I want to make sure, I want to be mindful of our listeners. Uh, Automated payment reconciliation, right? So one of the beauties of automating payments by phone is the process of reconciling those accounts back into their financial systems. Now, again, we talked before that it's not about the whole kitchen sink, but it's important to note that as they start to evolve, this is a possibility. Currently all payment processes that are handled by a person have to be manually reconciled. That means human error, it means time, it means interruptions in efficiency. So the end game is potentially automated the whole payment and reconciliation system, so process. So when a patient does call or customer does call and make a payment, that automatically will show up in their account without any human intervention. Do you have any thoughts on that? Because I
No,
know
yeah,
you've spoken
absolutely.
to me about
This is one
quite a
of my
bit about that.
favorite parts whenever I talk to a new customer and we're talking about these type of solutions, and then I end up saying, "Well, we can actually integrate this into your HIS, that being Epic, Cerner, or Meditech." They're like, "What? You can?" And every time it gives me a little chuckle. I love hearing that. Like, wait, that's possible. It's an ideal state, and we can do that. And the beauty of it is that it's all pre-built, meaning it's most of the time it's a very simple implementation. It can happen within 1 or 2 months, even with a diverse team that is doing multiple things at the same time, which is often what we're seeing, right? But it's very simple to do. It exists, and it gives me goosebumps every time hearing the customers being like, wait, this is something we can make happen now, right? It's a beautiful little thing where you can now integrate directly, do the data exchange, have L payments automate 365, 24/7, have no staff involved at any process, and have all the patient balances and billing be automatically synced and reconciled directly for you. And in the near future, of course, we're going to get that on the banking side as well, which is going to be an amazing, that's going to be a real goosebump moment for a
Yeah,
lot of
well,
patients at
we
the
we
hospital.
certainly we certainly have a lot of exciting opportunities,
Yeah.
and again, we continue to evolve. We continue to learn from experiences with our customers, and it's for those who work in the billing teams and the finance team, this is very exciting.
Yeah.
Now, to summarize, automating payment reconciliation, handling payment calls, and optimizing reminders are just some of the few ways that IVR payments can transform the process, right? So, what I want to leave the message is, if you're interested in learning more about how IVR payments can transform your business, please don't hesitate to reach out. I know Jonathan is available for any follow-up discussions. He's a wealth of knowledge in terms of healthcare and how automation can help the organization from a finance perspective improve and face and resolve some of the challenges. Uh, if his information is available at the bottom of the video as well. So I wanted to thank you, Jonathan, for your participation today. I wanted to thank our listeners for their participation, and looking forward to having you on these calls in the future. Stay tuned for the next discussion. This is Barnard Crespi signing off for today.